Hi everyone. The video that you're watching right now, it's a pre-recorded session of one of the Android hacking boot camps that I gave to a friend. This is to help you understand my teaching style, the vibe of the class, and for you to figure out whether it suits you or not. So if this video ignites that curiosity in you, if it fascinates you, you should definitely register for the Android hacking bootcamp. All the best. So now that we know a little bit about Android Studio and how to navigate around, let's talk about Android development. Now, one thing to understand here before we start Android development is why do we need to develop Android applications, right? Now, the reason is in a lot of bug bounty programs and even in client reports, they do not want you to use ADB because in order to exploit something using ADB, there are few conditions. For example, USB debugging needs to be enabled on the device. The device needs to be either in your network or you should have a physical access to it, right? Now, due to these conditions, it reduces the exploitability score, right? So instead, what they want is they want you to be able to create a POC Android application which you can send to a victim. Once the victim opens that Android application, the vulnerability present in the target app would automatically be exploited, right? So we learn Android development just to be able to create POC applications so that we can prove the impact of our vulnerability, or we can communicate the impact of a vulnerability in a much more profound sense. Okay, so there are three things when it comes to Android development. First is the manifest file. We already talked about this. Second is class or code files. This is where all the functionality is written. Also each activity on your application will have its own class file. So for example, if you have 3 activities in your application, you would have 3 different class files. And third, we have layout files. So each and every activity has its own layout file. A layout file simply allows you to make changes to how the activity looks, right? It allows you to tweak with different elements like buttons, placement, colors, and things like that. Think of layout files as HTML and CSS, right? They are only used to make your website look a certain way, but not to add functionality, right? In a similar sense, the layout files are used to change the feel and view of the activity, but in order to add functionality to it, we write code in the class files. For example, you add a button in the layout file. Now in order to make that button do something, you will add the functional code in class file. So basic process around how you should or how you will develop excuse me, POC applications is first you will create a class file, then you will edit its layout, third you will make it functional, and eventually you will test it. Now depending upon the outcome of testing that application, you will have to come back to either functionality change, to editing its layout, or maybe add a new class file or make some changes to the existing one. So there are 4 classes that I would like to introduce. There are multiple classes there in Android development, but for the sake of this bootcamp, we only need to know 4. Okay. Text view class allows us to perform operations on whatever text is there, which is visible to the user. Button class allows us to perform operations on buttons. Intent, like we talked about it already, intent allows different components of same application or different application to interact with each other. So we have intent class for that. And then we have the log class. Log class we'll use for debugging purposes, just to see if our code is working fine or not, right? So let's start with creating our Hello World app. So this is Android Studio. We'll just write new code in the onCreate function. So let's go to activity file. Let's remove this button for now, and we'll have a simple text here. The ID, all these are the attributes like I mentioned. ID is text. So let's just change its value to hello world. Now we'll run this app. Oh, I think I did not save it. Let's run it again. And now we can see hello world is printed. So this is your first Android application, right? Now you might wonder, what if I want to change something here? Do I have to come to this attribute and change text every time? Well, no, you don't have to do that. Let me show you a different way of doing this. So I'll just remove this, okay? And I'll take note of the ID for this element. So the ID for this element is called text, right? We'll come to a Java file and we'll define a text view element. Let's call it t1 is equal to r.id dot, we'll say find view by id, and we'll say r dot id dot text. So what's happening here is we are finding this particular element on this activity using find view by id function. R simply means the layout, id is we are referring which attribute we want to select, and text is the id of this particular element, right? Now we'll say t1 dot set text to something like welcome to our application. Let's run it again and see if the application loads this particular text. So as you can see, we have dynamically changed the text element here, right? This is one way of doing things, and the other way is obviously changing the value for this particular element here. Now let's do something more interesting. I'll zoom it in and let's add a button element. We'll anchor it first. Anchoring it basically allows us to make sure that the element does not switch positions when it is displayed on different screen or different displays, right? So we'll click on this. Now when we talk about button, its ID is button. There's a new attribute that we can use here, which is on click. Very similar to event listeners that we have in JavaScript, right? So we'll say on click and we'll say call a function clicked. We are yet to define this function, so we can just go to main activity. We'll remove this instruction from here and create a new function. And in this function, we'll just log saying button is clicked. Okay, so this is the tag that you'll use, and this is the message which will appear after this particular tag. So just to make sure, we have defined a function called clicked here, and in the activity in the layout file, I've asked it to call this function clicked. there's one more thing that we need to do. We need to pass view as an as a parameter to it. Okay, so this basically means the current view that is visible to the user. We need to pass that as an argument to this function, as a parameter to this function rather. Okay, so we have the button on click, it will call clicked function, and we have defined clicked function here. Let's relaunch our application and open logcat in order to see if our application works fine. We'll select our emulating device and let's click this button. So you can see once we click this button, you can see a new log with tag button and message as button is clicked, right? So our button is working fine. Now we can also do something similar to alert. So in Java, we have something called toast. A toast is basically alert, but in Java. Okay. Context is we pass the application context, which is the current context in which application is running. Text, we'll say button, my bad. Text, we'll say button is clicked. Now toast dot length short simply refers to the duration for which we want the pop-up to be visible, and dot show is the function that we are calling on this toast element. So let's rerun our application. Now we click on this, we can see an alert button is clicked. So that is how you can make your button or some other element functional, right? Now let's talk about intents. We have created this. We have already talked about creating this. Then let's talk about intents. So let's say I define another activity in this application. So I can go to com example.myApplication, go to new, go to activity, and I'll create a basic views activity here. We'll call it main activity 2 and we'll create this activity. Okay, so let's say I want to redirect the user to this second activity, main activity 2. Okay, so what I can do is let's first edit the view. So this is what the main activity 2 looks like. Okay, now I want my application to launch main activity when I click this main activity 2 when I click this button. So for that I can create an intent. We'll say intent i1. I1 is just the name of this intent object, is equal to new intent, and we'll define the package name and its class. So we can say package name is this, which basically means com.example.myApplication, and then we'll specify the class file where we want to send this intent. So we'll say main activity 2 dot class, and then we can say start activity and we'll specify this intent. This basically means I want to send an intent to main activity 2 class, and then I'll start that activity. Let's run and see if it works. We'll wait for our application to launch once again. Here's the button. Now if I click on this button, the second activity, main activity 2, is launched, right? So in a similar sense, you can call any exported activity in any other application which is present on the device. So let's suppose there is Facebook's main activity class. So you can specify the Facebook package name and the main activity class file and write these instructions, and if you click on that button, it will simply launch the Facebook Android application.